The cancer diagnosis came 3 weeks before my 28th birthday. Stage 4 gastric cancer, the doctor said with practiced sympathy, caused by years of malnutrition and chronic stress. 6 months, maybe less. I sat in that sterile office in Beijing's Tiantan Hospital, staring at the scans that showed the disease eating through my stomach lining like acid through paper, and felt nothing. Not fear, not anger, not even surprise. After everything the Guo family had put me through, death almost felt like relief. Like finally being allowed to rest after running a marathon with broken legs. The doctor continued talking, something about treatment options and palliative care, but his voice faded into background noise. I was thinking about how I had gotten here, to this moment, to this diagnosis that felt almost inevitable. 10 years of barely eating because I could not afford proper meals. 10 years of stress so constant it had become my baseline, my nervous system permanently set to fight or flight. 10 years of my body slowly cannibalizing itself because I was too busy surviving to notice I was dying. Dr. Wang, the oncologist, was a kind man in his 50s with tired eyes that had delivered too many death sentences. He waited patiently for me to process the information, his hands folded on the desk between us. When I finally met his gaze, he spoke gently. "Miss Guo, I understand this is overwhelming. But I need you to understand the timeline we are working with. The cancer is very advanced. It has metastasized to your lymph nodes and liver. Standard treatment options are unlikely to be effective at this stage." "How long?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "How long do I have?" Dr. Wang sighed, and I saw genuine sadness in his expression. This part of his job never got easier, I realized. Telling young people they were dying. With aggressive chemotherapy, perhaps 8 to 10 months. Without treatment, likely 3 to 6 months. The cancer is very aggressive, and it has had time to establish itself throughout your digestive system. 3 to 6 months. Less than half a year. I tried to feel something about this information, tried to access the fear or grief or anger that should have accompanied such news. But there was only a strange numbness, a disconnection between my mind and the reality of my impending death. Perhaps this was shock, the mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable truths. Or perhaps I had simply run out of emotions years ago, used them all up in the endless struggle to survive what the Guo family had done to me. My phone buzzed insistently on the chair beside me, the vibration loud in the quiet office. I glanced at the screen and saw multiple messages from my adoptive brother, Guo Yue. Even now, even as I sat in an oncologist's office being told I was dying, they could not leave me alone. Could not stop demanding things from me, extracting value from me, using me up until there was nothing left. "I should go," I said to Dr. Wang, standing abruptly. "Thank you for your time." Dr. Wang stood as well, concern evident on his face. "Miss Guo, please. We need to discuss your options, make a plan for managing your symptoms. This is not something you should face alone." But I was already moving toward the door, clutching my purse against my chest like armor. "I have always faced everything alone, doctor. This will be no different." The words came out more bitter than I intended, but they were true. I had been alone for 10 years, ever since the Guo family chose Guo Yue over me. Ever since they decided that the orphan girl they adopted was more valuable than their biological daughter. Outside the hospital, Beijing's autumn air was crisp and sharp, carrying the smell of roasting chestnuts from street vendors and exhaust from the endless traffic. I stood on the steps, watching the city move around me with its usual frenetic energy. Millions of people going about their lives, unaware that among them stood a woman who had just been given a death sentence. I felt invisible, insubstantial, as if I was already fading from the world. My phone buzzed again, and this time I looked at the messages. All from Guo Yue, each one more demanding than the last. "Mother wants to know if you've signed over the intellectual property rights yet. Stop being difficult. The family needs those patents for the new product line. Why aren't you responding? We have a board meeting tomorrow and we need those documents. This is typical of you, Ming. Always putting yourself before the family. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us. I laughed, a bitter sound that made a passing elderly woman glance at me with concern. After everything they had done for me. What had they done for me exactly? Raised me until I was 18, yes. Fed and clothed me, educated me at expensive schools, given me every material advantage. And then, when Guo Yue appeared with her sweet smiles and calculated tears, they had stripped all of it away. Taken my creative work and given it to her. Taken their love and affection and given it to her. Taken my place in the family and given it to her. Until I was nothing more than a convenient source of intellectual property they could mine whenever they needed something. The patents Guo Yue was demanding were my last creations, a series of business process improvements I had developed 3 years ago when I was still naive enough to share my work with the family. I had registered them in my own name, one of the few smart decisions I had made in those final desperate years. And now, with the company facing increased competition, they wanted to take those too. Wanted me to hand over my last remaining assets so Guo Yue could take credit for them, so the Guo family could profit while I died alone in a hospital bed. I deleted the messages without responding. What was the point? I would be dead in a few months. Let them fight over my estate after I was gone. Let them discover that I had left everything to charity, ensuring that not a single yuan would go to the people who had destroyed me. It was a small, petty revenge, but it was all I had left. The thought brought a grim smile to my face as I hailed a taxi to take me back to my tiny apartment in the city's unfashionable outskirts. The apartment was a single room in a building that should have been condemned years ago. The walls were stained with water damage, the plumbing barely functioned, and in winter, cold seeped through the windows no matter how much I tried to seal them. But it was mine, paid for with money I earned from the 3 jobs I worked to survive. No one could take it from me or tell me I was not worthy of it. After living in the Guo family mansion for 18 years, I should have hated this place. But instead, I found a strange comfort in its shabbiness. It was honest in a way the mansion never was. It did not pretend to be something it was not. I sat on my narrow bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and looked around at my life. A few changes of clothes hanging in the small closet. A hot plate and rice cooker in the corner that constituted my kitchen. Stacks of notebooks filled with poems and stories I no longer had the energy to try to publish. Not after watching Guo Yue take credit for so many of my previous works. A laptop computer so old it took 5 minutes to boot up. This was what my life had become, what the Guo family had reduced me to. I thought about the girl I had been at 18, full of dreams and naive trust. That girl had believed her family loved her, that she was valued and important to them. She had believed that talent and hard work would be rewarded, that honesty and integrity mattered. She had believed in justice and fairness and all the comfortable lies people tell themselves about how the world works. That girl had died slowly over the past 10 years, replaced by this hollow shell who could receive a terminal cancer diagnosis and feel nothing. The irony was almost poetic. I had spent 10 years killing myself slowly, and now my body had decided to finish the job more efficiently. Gastric cancer from years of skipping meals because I could not afford to eat regularly. From stress that had become so chronic my body no longer knew how to relax. From a life lived in constant survival mode, every system in my body pushed beyond its limits until something finally broke. The doctors said the cancer had probably been developing for 3 or 4 years, growing silently while I worked 3 jobs and tried to figure out how to pay rent and told myself I was fine. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling where a water stain had formed a shape that looked almost like a bird in flight. How appropriate, I thought. A bird trapped in a ceiling, frozen in perpetual flight toward freedom it would never reach. That was me. Always reaching for something better, something more, but never quite escaping the circumstances that held me captive. Even death would not be freedom. It would just be another cage, final and absolute. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not Guo Yue. It was a notification from the hospital about the experimental treatment trial. The message was short and clinical. You have been accepted into the Phase 3 trial for AG7892, a novel immunotherapy treatment for advanced gastric cancer. The survival rate for participants in previous phases has been 4.7%. Please contact the research coordinator if you wish to proceed. 4.7%. Less than 1 in 20. The odds of the treatment working were abysmal. Barely better than doing nothing at all. But it was something, and I had nothing else left to lose. No family who cared if I lived or died. No career worth preserving. No future to protect. I was 28 years old, dying alone in a terrible apartment, with no one who would mourn my passing. Why not gamble on a 4.7% chance? At least then I could say I tried one last time to fight against a world determined to destroy me. I called the research coordinator and scheduled my first treatment for the following Monday. The coordinator, a cheerful woman named Nurse Lu, seemed genuinely pleased that I was participating. Every patient we enroll brings us closer to understanding how to help others, she said warmly. Your contribution to medical science is invaluable, Miss Guo. I almost laughed at that. My contribution to medical science. After a life spent contributing to others only to have my contributions stolen and credited to someone else, it was fitting that my final act would be contributing my dying body to research that might help people I would never meet. The days before the treatment passed in a strange blur. I called in sick to all 3 of my jobs, knowing I would likely never return to any of them. I paid my rent 3 months in advance, using most of my savings, because some part of me still cared about not leaving debts behind. I wrote a will on a piece of notebook paper, leaving my few possessions to the elderly neighbor, who had occasionally brought me soup when she noticed I looked particularly unwell. I boxed up my notebooks, all those poems and stories and songs that Guo Yue had stolen in my previous life, and left them with a note saying they should be burned after my death. I did not want the Guo family finding them and giving them to her, even posthumously. On the evening before my treatment, I received an unexpected visitor. There was a knock on my door, timid and hesitant, and when I opened it, I found a young woman I did not recognize standing in the hallway. She was perhaps 25, dressed in business casual attire that looked expensive, and she held a folder nervously in front of her. "Are you Guo Ming?" she asked, her voice uncertain. When I confirmed my identity, she took a deep breath. "My name is Chen Xiaoli. I work for Future Media Group. I am a journalist, and I have been investigating the Guo family's business practices." I started to close the door, having no interest in being part of whatever exposé this journalist was pursuing, but she quickly added, "I know about Guo Yue. I know she has been taking credit for work she did not create. I know about the songs and poems and business proposals that were actually written by you. And I want to tell your story if you will let me." Her words stopped me cold. Someone knew. Someone had figured out the truth. After 10 years of silence, of swallowing the bitter reality that no one would believe me if I spoke up, here was a person who had independently discovered what Guo Yue had done. "How did you find out?" I asked, opening the door wider and gesturing for her to come inside. Chen Xiaoli entered, looking around the small apartment with visible surprise. She had probably expected something better, given my family connections. "I was researching a different story about intellectual property theft in creative industries," she explained, settling into the apartment's only chair while I sat on the bed. I started noticing patterns in Guo Yue's work. Her writing style changed dramatically between her first published pieces and her later work. Her songs showed sudden improvements in sophistication that did not match natural artistic development. Chen Xiaoli opened her folder and pulled out several documents, laying them on the bed between us. They were analyses comparing different pieces of work attributed to Guo Yue, highlighting inconsistencies in style, theme, and technical execution. These early pieces are clearly from the same writer, she said, pointing to several poems published under Guo Yue's name 5 years ago. The voice is consistent, the themes interconnected, the imagery builds on itself. But then suddenly the work changes, becomes deeper, more mature, more technically accomplished. As if a completely different person started writing under the same name. That is because a different person did start writing under that name, I said quietly. Me. Those early pieces, the ones that are consistent, those are actually Guo Yue's work. She is not completely without talent. But everything after that, everything that made her famous, that is mine. She stole it piece by piece over the course of 5 years. And my family, the Guo family, they not only allowed it but encouraged it. Because they valued her more than they valued me. Chen Xiaoli nodded, unsurprised by my confession. I suspected as much. But I needed confirmation and I needed to understand how it happened. Why you let her steal your work without fighting back. She paused, studying my face carefully. You look unwell, Miss Guo. If you do not mind me saying so. Are you sick? The observation was gentle but direct, and I appreciated the honesty. I have cancer, I told her flatly. Stage 4. Terminal. I have approximately 3 to 6 months left to live. Tomorrow I start an experimental treatment that has less than a 5% chance of working. The journalist's face crumpled with genuine sympathy. I am so sorry. Had no idea. If I had known, I would not have bothered you with this. I can come back another time, or not at all if you prefer. But I shook my head. No. I want to tell you everything. I want someone to know the truth before I die. Not because I think it will change anything or because I want revenge, but because I need someone to know that I existed. That my work was real. That I mattered, even if only to one person. And so I told her everything. The irony was almost funny. I was their biological daughter, born to Guo Zhenting and his wife Madame Guo, raised in their home until I was 18. But somewhere along the way, I had become less valuable than the orphan girl they brought home when I was 13. Guo Yue, with her sweet smiles and carefully calculated tears, had convinced them I was ungrateful, selfish, cruel. And they had believed her. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence she planted against me. They had believed her because she was easier to love than I was. The experimental treatment was my last option, a clinical trial for advanced cancer patients who had exhausted all standard therapies. The survival rate was less than 5%, but I had nothing to lose. The intake nurse looked at me with pity as she inserted the 4-line. Do you have family we should contact? She asked gently. Someone who can be here for you during treatment. I almost laughed. Family. The people who should have been my family were probably celebrating my impending death, already dividing up my remaining assets. No, I told her. There's no one. The medication burned as it entered my bloodstream, a fire that spread through my veins and consumed everything in its path. The last thing I remember thinking before consciousness slipped away was that I hoped the afterlife would be kinder than this life had been. But when I opened my eyes, I was not dead. I was in my childhood bedroom in the Guo family mansion in Hangzhou. Sunlight streaming through windows I had not seen in 10 years. And when I looked in the mirror, the face staring back at me was 18 years old. I spent the first hour convinced I was hallucinating, that this was some cruel trick of a dying brain. But the room was too detailed, too real. I could feel the silk of the bedspread beneath my fingers, could smell jasmine from the garden below, could hear the familiar sounds of the household stirring to life. This was not a dream or a vision. Somehow, impossibly, I had traveled back in time. Back to before everything fell apart, before Guo Yue destroyed me piece by piece, before I lost everything that mattered. The date was May 3rd. I knew this date intimately because it marked the beginning of the end. Today, my father Guo Zhenting would come home from his business trip to Shanghai with an announcement. He had found a young woman in need, an orphan working at a bookstore he frequented, brilliant and charming and so very alone.
Guo Yue.
He would propose bringing her into our family, giving her opportunities she never had. And my mother, kind-hearted Madame Guo, would agree because she had always wanted more children. They would frame it as charity, as using our considerable wealth to help someone less fortunate. But I knew the truth now. Guo Yue was not some random orphan my father stumbled upon. She was the younger sister of Chen Wei, a business rival who had been systematically trying to infiltrate our family for years. The chance encounter had been carefully orchestrated. Guo Yue had been planted in that bookstore specifically because Chen Wei knew my father went there weekly. She had spent months learning his preferences, his values, his vulnerabilities. And when the moment was right, she had made her move. My father, naive and generous, never suspected he was being manipulated. In my original timeline, I had been cautiously welcoming to Guo Yue. I was lonely, the only child in a house full of adults and their endless business concerns. Sister seemed like a gift. But Guo Yue had not wanted a sister. She had wanted my life. And over the next 5 years, she had systematically stolen it. She stole my creative work, presenting my poems and songs and stories as her own. She stole my relationship with my parents, poisoning them against me with carefully crafted lies. She even stole my fiancé, convincing him that I was cold and unstable while she was warm and understanding. By the time I was 23, I had nothing. My parents barely spoke to me, convinced I was jealous and spiteful. My former fiancé was engaged to Guo Yue. The career I had built as a writer and composer was gone, all my published work credited to her. I was living in a tiny apartment, working 3 jobs to survive, watching from a distance as Guo Yue accepted awards for my art and gave interviews about her creative process. The gastric cancer had developed slowly, the result of skipping meals to make rent, of stress so constant it became my baseline state, of a body slowly destroying itself from the inside out. But now I had a second chance. I was 18 again with 10 years of bitter knowledge and nothing left to lose. This time I would not be kind. This time I would not give Guo Yue the benefit of the doubt. This time I would protect what was mine and ensure that she paid for what she had done. Or rather, what she would do if I allowed it. The distinction was philosophical, but it mattered. I was not seeking revenge for something that had happened. I was preventing it from ever occurring in the first place. My first action was to establish irrefutable ownership of my creative work. I spent the morning scanning every notebook, every journal, every scrap of paper where I had written poems or song lyrics or story ideas. I uploaded everything to multiple cloud storage services, registered everything with copyright offices, established timestamps that would be impossible to dispute. In my original timeline, I had been careless about this, never imagining someone would steal my work so comprehensively. I had learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible. I would not repeat the mistake. My second action was to prepare for Guo Yue's arrival. I researched her brother Chen Wei, using knowledge from my previous timeline to dig up information that should not have been accessible to an 18-year-old girl. Business fraud, intellectual property theft, associations with questionable characters. Chen Wei was successful, but his success was built on a foundation of lies and stolen ideas. And Guo Yue was his accomplice, his tool for infiltrating families and extracting their wealth and resources. When my father arrived home that evening, I was ready. He came into the dining room where we were having dinner, his face animated with excitement. "I have wonderful news," he announced. "I've met the most remarkable young woman in Shanghai. She works at the bookstore I visit, the one that specializes in classical literature. Her name is Guo Yue, and she has had such a difficult life. Parents died when she was young, raised in an orphanage, working multiple jobs to support herself while studying. She reminds me so much of my mother, actually. That same determination and grace despite hardship. My mother smiled warmly. She sounds lovely, Zhenting. What are you proposing? My father sat down, reaching for my mother's hand. I want to bring her into our family. Sponsor her education, give her a home here. We have so much and she has so little. It seems like the right thing to do. In my original timeline, I had agreed immediately, eager for a sister. But this time I knew better. That's very generous, father, I said carefully. But shouldn't we learn more about her first? About her background, her connections. It seems wise to be cautious. My father looked surprised. Cautious. Ming, she's a young woman in need, not a business acquisition. The use of my name, Guo Ming, felt almost foreign. In my previous life's final years, my parents had stopped using my name altogether, referring to me as that girl or the difficult one when they acknowledged me at all. I understand, I said, keeping my voice reasonable. But you've always taught me to be thorough in important decisions. This woman would be living in our home, becoming part of our family. Don't we owe it to ourselves and to her to ensure it's the right fit? My mother nodded slowly. Ming has a point, dear. Perhaps we should meet her first. Invite her for dinner. Get to know her before making such a significant commitment. My father frowned but agreed. Fine. I'll arrange for her to visit this weekend. But I'm telling you both, she's wonderful. You'll see. As my parents continued discussing the logistics, I felt a small victory. I had bought myself time, delayed Guo Yue's integration into the family. But I knew this was just the beginning. Guo Yue was patient and clever. She would not give up simply because of a slight delay. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening. I spent the intervening days preparing, gathering more evidence against Chen Wei, building a case that would be impossible to dismiss. But I also prepared myself emotionally for seeing Guo Yue again. In my memories, she was larger than life, a monster who had destroyed everything I loved. But in reality, at this point in the timeline, she was just a 20-year-old woman executing her brother's plan. Dangerous, yes. But also human, vulnerable, capable of being stopped. When Guo Yue arrived, I was struck by how ordinary she seemed. Pretty but not beautiful, with the kind of face that photographed better than it appeared in person. She dressed modestly, slightly shabby in a way that telegraphed poverty without quite achieving authenticity. Her smile was warm but practiced, her eyes assessing even as she pretended to be overwhelmed by the grandeur of our home. She was good, I had to admit. Very good. If I had not known what was coming, I might have been fooled again. Thank you so much for inviting me, Guo Yue said, her voice soft and slightly tremulous. Mr. Guo has been so kind to me. I never imagined I would be welcomed into such a beautiful home. My mother immediately warmed to her, as I knew she would. We're happy to have you, dear. Zhenting has told me so much about you. Please make yourself comfortable. We moved to the dining room, and through the meal, Guo Yue performed brilliantly. She answered questions about her background with just the right mix of sadness and resilience. She complimented the food effusively but not excessively. She deferred to my parents constantly while occasionally showing flashes of intelligence and wit. She was building a character, I realized. The grateful orphan, the diamond in the rough, the daughter they never knew they wanted. And she largely ignored me, which was tactically clever. In my original timeline, she had been effusively friendly at first, treating me like the sister she always wanted. But she had learned from experience, apparently. This time, she was positioning herself as my parents' daughter, not my sister. The distinction was subtle but significant. When my father asked Guo Yue about her interests, she launched into a passionate discussion of classical Chinese poetry, specifically the Tang Dynasty poets. It was an impressive performance, demonstrating both knowledge and enthusiasm. My father was delighted, engaging her in a detailed literary discussion that excluded both my mother and me. I waited until there was a pause in the conversation, then spoke. That's fascinating, Yu. May I call you Yu? I'm also interested in poetry. I've actually been working on some compositions myself, modern interpretations of classical forms. Perhaps you'd like to see them sometime. It was a test carefully constructed. In my original timeline, this was how it had begun. I had shared my work with her, eager for feedback from someone who seemed to appreciate literature as much as I did. And she had stolen it, piece by piece, until my entire portfolio belonged to her. Guo Yu's eyes flickered with something I could not quite read. Calculation, perhaps. Or recognition that I was not as easy a mark as she had expected. I would love that, she said warmly. I'm always eager to see other people's creative work. Perhaps we could even collaborate. Two perspectives on the classical tradition could create something truly unique. It was a brilliant move, I had to admit. By suggesting collaboration, she was already positioning herself to claim partial credit for anything I created. But I smiled back just as warmly. That sounds wonderful. Though of course we would need to be very clear about who contributed what. Intellectual property rights can be so complicated. The comment hung in the air, slightly aggressive, slightly odd in the context of a friendly dinner conversation. My parents looked confused, but Guo Yu's smile never wavered. Of course, she said smoothly. Clear attribution is essential in any creative partnership. She had caught my warning, I realized. She knew that I was not going to be easy to manipulate. But let her know that this time would be different. The dinner ended with my parents inviting Guo Yu to stay with us for a trial period. Just a few weeks, my mother said. To see how everyone gets along. If it works well, we can discuss something more permanent. Guo Yu accepted with perfect grace, tears of gratitude that seemed genuine even though I knew they were not. After she left, my father turned to me. Well, what did you think of her? I chose my words carefully. She's very polished, very well spoken. Perhaps surprisingly so for someone who has had such a difficult background. My father frowned. Ming, that sounds almost accusatory. Are you suggesting she's not genuine? I met his eyes directly. I'm suggesting that we should verify her story before bringing her into our home permanently. It's not cruel to be cautious, father. It's wise. My mother intervened before the conversation could escalate. Ming has a point, dear. Perhaps we could hire an investigator. Just to confirm the basic facts of her background. If everything is as she says, then we proceed. If not, we've protected ourselves. My father looked unhappy but agreed. Fine. But I think you're both being unnecessarily suspicious. I hired the investigator myself, a discreet professional who specialized in background checks for wealthy families. I provided him with specific information to look for, details I remembered from my previous life about Chen Wei and his operations. Within a week, he had found the connections. Guo Yu was indeed Chen Wei's sister. They had been separated as children when their parents died, but they had reconnected 5 years ago. And since then, Chen Wei had been systematically using his sister to infiltrate wealthy families, stealing business secrets and intellectual property. The investigator's report was comprehensive and damning. It documented 3 previous families that Guo Yu had embedded herself in, each time leaving after extracting valuable information or resources. In one case, a pharmaceutical company's research had been stolen and sold to competitors. In another, a tech startup's proprietary code had been replicated and released under Chen Wei's company name. And in the most recent case, a family's investment strategies had been leaked, allowing Chen Wei to anticipate their moves and profit accordingly. When I presented the report to my parents, I watched my father's face crumble. He had genuinely believed Guo Yu was a kindred spirit, someone he could help. Learning that he had been manipulated, that his generosity had been weaponized against him, was devastating. How could I have been so stupid? He asked, his voice hollow. How did I not see this? My mother touched his arm gently. Because you have a good heart, Zhenting. Because you want to help people. That's not something to be ashamed of. But Ming saw it, my father said, looking at me with new respect. You questioned her immediately. How did you know? I could not tell him the truth, that I had lived through the consequences of his mistake once before. So I offered a partial truth. I've been reading about business fraud lately, about how companies are infiltrated by people who seem trustworthy. It occurred to me that individuals could use the same tactics. So when you seemed almost too perfect, I became suspicious. I'm sorry I was right. My father shook his head. Don't apologize for being smart, Ming. You protected our family. That takes courage. We confronted Guo Yue the next day when she arrived for her planned overnight stay. My father presented the evidence calmly but firmly, watching her face as she realized her scheme had been exposed. She tried to deny it at first, tears streaming down her face, voice breaking with emotion. This is wrong, she insisted. These reports, they must be about someone else. I would never hurt you. You've been so kind to me. But when my father mentioned Chen Wei by name, something shifted in her expression. The tears stopped. The trembling ceased. And for just a moment, I saw the real Guo Yue, cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. You should have just accepted me, she said, her voice flat. It would have been easier for everyone. Now things will become unpleasant. It was a threat barely veiled. My father's face hardened. You need to leave. And if you or your brother attempt to come near my family again, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy you both. Do you understand? Guo Yue smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You may think you've won, Mr. Guo. But there are many ways to hurt a family. Many types of theft that leave no obvious trail. Enjoy your victory. It won't last. She left and we thought it was over. But Guo Yue had been serious about her threat. Within weeks, strange things began happening. Business proposals my father had been working on appeared in competitors' presentations before he could submit them. Confidential financial information was leaked to journalists. Rumors began circulating about the Guo family's business practices, lies designed to damage our reputation. And I started receiving messages, anonymous but clearly from Guo Yue, promising that she would take everything from me just as I had taken her opportunity away from her. I realized then that simply preventing Guo Yue from joining our family was not enough. As long as she and Chen Wei were free to operate, they would continue attacking us. I needed to go on the offensive, to dismantle their entire operation so thoroughly that they would never threaten anyone again. It was a daunting task, one that would require resources, strategy, and a willingness to be ruthless that my 18-year-old self should not have possessed. But I had lived through their destruction once. I knew exactly how far I needed to go. I started by gathering allies. The families Guo Yue had previously infiltrated were all victims, all nursing grudges they had no effective way to address. I contacted them one by one, presenting evidence of the pattern, showing how we had all been targeted by the same operation. Together we filed a coordinated lawsuit against Chen Wei and Guo Yue, alleging fraud, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy. The lawsuit was massive, well-funded, and impossible to dismiss as the complaints of a single disgruntled party. The first family I approached was the Zhang family, owners of a pharmaceutical company. In my research, I had discovered that Guo Yue had spent 6 months living with them 3 years prior, posing as a distant cousin in need of temporary housing. During that time, she had gained access to their research facility and stolen formulas for several drugs in development. Those formulas had appeared in Chen Wei's company's pipeline within months, allowing him to beat the Zhangs to market. The company never recovered from the financial blow. Mrs. Zhang wept when I showed her the evidence connecting Guo Yue to the theft. We thought we were helping family, she said bitterly. My husband's health declined after the company collapsed. He blamed himself for being careless with security. But it wasn't carelessness. It was calculated infiltration. I felt a kinship with her pain, understanding intimately what it meant to be betrayed by someone you had welcomed into your home, someone you had tried to help. We can make this right, I told her. Not completely. But we can ensure they face consequences. The second family, the Liu family, owned a tech startup that had been developing revolutionary AI algorithms. Guo Yue had worked as an intern there, charming her way into the position despite having no relevant qualifications. She had spent 3 months copying code, stealing proprietary architecture, and documenting their development process. Chen Wei had replicated their product and launched it 6 months before the Lius could complete their own version. Without the first-to-market advantage and with their intellectual property compromised, the startup had folded. The founder, Liu Jian, had attempted suicide when the company failed. He survived, but the experience had broken something in him. When I met with Liu Jian, I could see the damage in his eyes, the way he flinched when I mentioned Guo Yue's name. I should have seen it, he said repeatedly. She asked too many questions, was too interested in aspects of the business that had nothing to do with her role. But I thought she was just enthusiastic, eager to learn. I was flattered by her interest. This was Guo Yue's true talent, I realized. Not creativity or intelligence, but the ability to identify what people wanted to believe about themselves and reflect it back to them. She made victims feel special, made them want to trust her even when warning signs were present. The third family had the most tragic story. The Wang family had taken in Guo Yue as a live-in tutor for their teenage daughter. Over 8 months, Guo Yue had systematically isolated the daughter from her parents, convinced the girl that her family was controlling and abusive, and encouraged her to rebel. While the family was distracted by their daughter's sudden behavioral changes, Guo Yue had copied financial documents, investment strategies, and business contacts. The information had allowed Chen Wei to anticipate the family's market moves and position himself to profit from their losses. The Wangs had lost millions, but worse, their relationship with their daughter had been permanently damaged. Wang Meili, the mother, told me with visible pain, "My daughter still won't speak to me. She believes everything you told her about us, thinks we're monsters who tried to control her life. We were just being parents, setting reasonable boundaries, trying to keep her safe. But you twisted everything, made normal parenting seem like abuse. And we cannot prove otherwise because it's just her word against ours, and our daughter chose to believe her." This aspect of Guo Yue's crimes, the emotional devastation that could not be quantified in legal terms, enraged me more than the financial theft. She had not just stolen money or intellectual property. She had destroyed families, shattered trust, weaponized love itself. Together, these 4 families plus mine created an undeniable pattern. 5 separate incidents over 6 years, always the same method, always with Guo Yue as the common factor and Chen Wei as the ultimate beneficiary. We documented everything meticulously, hired the best lawyers, and prepared for a battle that would require patience and resources. The defendants would try to drag things out, hoping we would lose momentum or run out of money. But we were united by more than just legal interest. We were united by shared trauma, by the knowledge of what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you had tried to help. The lawsuit filing made national news. Serial fraudsters exposed. Brother-sister team accused of systematic infiltration and theft, read the headline in the China Business Journal. The article detailed the accusations, the pattern of behavior, the estimated damages exceeding 100 million yuan. Journalists dug into Chen Wei's background, discovering even more questionable business dealings that had previously gone unnoticed. His company's stock price plummeted as partners and clients reassessed their relationships with him. Chen Wei responded with his own legal team, claiming the accusations were coordinated harassment from jealous business rivals. "I am being targeted because of my success," he declared at a press conference. These families cannot accept that they were outmaneuvered in the marketplace, so they have concocted this elaborate conspiracy theory to explain their own failures. The truth is that I am simply better at business than they are, and they resent it. It was a calculated move, trying to reframe the narrative from fraud to competition, from criminal behavior to capitalist success. But we had anticipated this response. At our own press conference, we presented more evidence, including email communications between Guo Yue and Chen Wei discussing specific families to target, specific information to extract, specific timelines for infiltration. The emails had been encrypted, but our forensic investigators had managed to recover them from a seized hard drive. Seeing the cold calculation in writing, the way they discussed human beings as targets and marks, shifted public opinion decisively against them. These people are predators, I stated at the press conference, my voice steady despite the cameras and microphones thrust toward me. They identify vulnerable families, exploit our generosity and trust, and systematically steal from us. This is not business competition. This is organized crime dressed in business casual. The quote was picked up by every major outlet, and suddenly the story had a human face, an articulate victim who refused to be silenced. Media requests flooded in, but I was selective about interviews, choosing platforms that would let me tell the full story without sensationalization. One interview in particular stands out in my memory. It was with a prominent business journalist known for her tough questions and refusal to accept easy answers. She asked me directly, "Miss Guo, some people say that you are just a spoiled rich girl who cannot handle business competition. That your family's wealth has made you think you deserve success without working for it. How do you respond to that characterization?" It was designed to be inflammatory, to make me defensive or angry. But I had learned in my previous life how to handle hostile questions. I would say that my family's wealth has indeed given me advantages, I replied calmly. Better education, access to resources, connections that others might not have. I acknowledge that privilege openly. But this case is not about competition or about deserving success. This is about theft. Guo Yue and Chen Wei did not compete with us. They infiltrated our homes, stole our work, and sold it as their own. That is not business. That is crime. And being wealthy does not mean we should accept being victimized without seeking justice. The journalist pressed. But you personally prevented Guo Yue from being adopted into your family. Some might say you judged her unfairly, that you denied her an opportunity because of prejudice against her background. This was the more insidious attack, trying to make my self-protection seem like classism or cruelty. I investigated her background and discovered she was part of a criminal operation, I said firmly. That is not prejudice. That is due diligence. If I had not done that investigation, my family would have suffered the same fate as the other families here today. Is it prejudice to protect yourself from someone who intends you harm? Or is it wisdom? The interview ended with the journalist clearly unable to rattle me, unable to find the crack in my composure that would make for more dramatic television. But more importantly, it established the narrative we wanted. This was about justice, not revenge or class warfare or any other distraction the defense might try to introduce. We were victims seeking accountability, and we would not be dismissed or silenced. The legal proceedings took 18 months. There were dozens of hearings, countless motions and counter-motions, attempts by the defense to have charges dismissed or evidence suppressed. But our legal team was relentless, and more importantly, we had truth on our side. The evidence was overwhelming once it was all laid out in court. Email communications showing premeditation. Financial records tracing stolen intellectual property from us to Chen Wei's company. Testimony from employees who had witnessed Guo Yue's activities. Timeline analyses showing the pattern of infiltration and theft. During Guo Yue's testimony, I watched her carefully, looking for any sign of the person I remembered from my previous timeline. But this Guo Yue had never had the chance to successfully destroy anyone. She had been stopped early, before she could build the confidence and resources that had made her so dangerous in my original life. This Guo Yue was scared, defensive, realizing that her calculated charm would not work in a courtroom with hostile judges and damning evidence. She tried tears, but they rang false. She tried righteous indignation, but it came across as entitled rather than justified. Did you or did you not send this email to your brother Chen Wei detailing the Wang family's financial strategies? The prosecutor asked, displaying the message on screens throughout the courtroom. Guo Yue stammered, trying to find a way to deny what was clearly her email address, her writing style, her specific knowledge. That was taken out of context, she finally managed. The prosecutor smiled. Then please provide the context that would make sharing a family's private financial information with your brother, who runs a competing investment firm, seem appropriate. There was no good answer, and Guo Yue knew it. I watched her realize in real time that she was going to lose, that all the charm and manipulation that had served her so well would not save her here. For just a moment, our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw something in her expression that might have been recognition. Did she somehow understand that I knew what she was capable of, that I had stopped her not just from infiltrating my family but from becoming the person she would have been? The moment passed, and she looked away, but I carried that glimpse of awareness with me. Chen Wei's testimony was more calculated. He tried to maintain that he was a legitimate businessman, that any similarities between his products and others were coincidental or the result of independent development. But the prosecution systematically dismantled this defense, showing timeline after timeline where his innovations appeared within months of Guo Yue's infiltration of companies working on the same ideas. The pattern was too consistent, too exact, to be explained by coincidence or even by industrial espionage through normal channels. It required the kind of intimate, sustained access that only Guo Yue's infiltration method could provide. Mr. Chen, is it not true that every major product your company has released in the past 6 years was preceded by your sister spending significant time embedded in a competing organization? The prosecutor asked. Chen Wei tried to deflect, talking about market research and competitive intelligence, but the prosecutor cut him off. I am asking a yes or no question. Did your sister spend time in these organizations before you released competing products? Yes or no? Finally, reluctantly. Yes. The admission hung in the air, damning in its simplicity. The verdict, when it finally came, was everything we had hoped for and more. Chen Wei was convicted on 11 counts of fraud, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 15 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 10 years. His company was ordered dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the victims. Guo Yue was convicted on 9 counts as his accomplice and received 10 years. The judge, delivering the sentence, made a statement that captured exactly what we had been trying to articulate throughout the trial. The defendants in this case used trust as a weapon, the judge said. They identified people's best qualities, their generosity and willingness to help those in need, and turned those qualities against them. This is not simply business fraud. This is a profound violation of the social contract, an assault on the very foundations of civil society. People must be able to help others without fear that their kindness will be systematically exploited. These sentences reflect not just the financial damages caused but the breach of trust that cannot be measured in monetary terms. I wept when the verdict was read, not from satisfaction or revenge but from relief. It was over. The battle I had been fighting since I woke up at 18 with impossible knowledge was finally finished. Guo Yue and Chen Wei would spend years in prison. The families they had victimized would receive compensation. And most importantly, they would never hurt anyone else the way they had hurt us. The other families whose cases we had brought forward wept as well, holding each other, finally vindicated after years of wondering if they would ever see justice. Outside the courthouse, we held hands as we faced the media, a united front of victims who had refused to stay victims. Reporters shouted questions, but I raised my hand for silence. Today justice was served, I said simply. Not perfectly, not completely, because the damage these people caused cannot be fully repaired. But served nonetheless. We hope this verdict sends a message to anyone considering similar schemes. You will be caught, you will be prosecuted, and you will face consequences. Trust is not a weakness to be exploited. It is a strength that, when defended, proves stronger than any manipulation. The legal victory was satisfying, but it was the aftermath that revealed its true value. With Chen Wei's company dissolved and his methods exposed, a wave of regulatory changes swept through the industry. Companies implemented stricter background checks, better security protocols, formal systems for tracking intellectual property and controlling access to sensitive information. What had happened to us became a case study in business schools, a cautionary tale about the importance of balancing openness with appropriate skepticism. But more personally, the victory gave us all closure. The Zhang family could finally grieve their lost company without blame and self-recrimination. Lu Jian began therapy and started slowly rebuilding his life, knowing that his failure had not been his fault. The Wangs began family therapy with their daughter, using the court evidence to show her how she had been manipulated. It was a long process, but knowing the truth gave them a foundation to build on. And my family, we could finally relax, knowing the threat was neutralized permanently. Simultaneously, I leaked information to business journalists about Chen Wei's methods, his history of theft, his use of his sister as an infiltration tool. The stories that resulted were devastating, destroying his reputation and making it impossible for him to continue operating as he had. Companies began auditing their relationships with him, discovering theft and fraud they had previously attributed to internal problems. Partnerships dissolved. Contracts were cancelled. Chen Wei's empire, built entirely on stolen foundations, began to collapse. Guo Yue, realizing she was going down with her brother, tried one last desperate move. She approached my father directly, begging for mercy. I was forced into this, she claimed. Chen Wei is my brother. He threatened me, said he would hurt me if I didn't help him. I never wanted to deceive you. Please, Mr. Guo, show me the compassion you were willing to show before. It was a good performance, almost convincing. But my father had learned his lesson. If you were truly a victim, he said coldly, you would have come to us for help instead of threatening us when you were exposed. You made your choices, you now live with the consequences. The legal battle took 2 years to fully resolve. Chen Wei was convicted of multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Guo Yue, as his accomplice, received 10 years. Their assets were seized to pay settlements to their victims, leaving them with nothing. Justice, when it finally came, was thorough and absolute. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired and empty and uncertain what came next. I had spent 2 years focused entirely on bringing them down. Now that it was done, I had no idea what to do with myself. My father, watching me struggle with this existential exhaustion, made a suggestion. You should travel, he said. See the world. Figure out who you are when you're not fighting battles or protecting yourself. You're 20 years old, Ming. You should be discovering your passions, making mistakes, falling in love. Instead, you've been carrying the weight of our family's survival. Let someone else carry it for a while. His words hit me harder than I expected. I was 20 years old. In my original timeline, I had been 20 when Guo Yue stole my first major creative work. I had been 25 when my parents cut me off completely. I had been 28 when I died alone in a hospital. But in this timeline I was safe, protected, with years of life stretching before me. I decided to study abroad, choosing a university in Seoul that offered programs in both business and creative writing. Korea felt right somehow, far enough from China that I could have space but close enough that I was not completely adrift. The city was vibrant and modern, A place where I could reinvent myself without the weight of family expectations or past trauma. Well, past trauma from a timeline that no longer existed. The metaphysics of my situation still confused me, but I had stopped trying to understand it. I was alive. I was healthy. I had a second chance. That was enough. In Seoul, I thrived in ways I never had before. I published poetry in literary journals, using my real name for the first time in either timeline. I joined a music collective, collaborating with other artists to create songs that fused traditional Asian melodies with contemporary pop structures. I made friends based on genuine connection rather than strategic necessity. And I met him, Miho. He was a year ahead of me, studying music production, with a smile that lit up rooms and a gentleness that seemed almost fragile in its authenticity. We met at an open mic night where I was performing some of my poetry. He approached me afterward, said my words had made him cry. "They're so honest," he said. "Like you've lived 100 years instead of 20. Where does that wisdom come from?" I could not tell him the truth, that I had literally lived more than my chronological age suggested, that I carried memories of suffering and death that shaped every word I wrote. So I said, "I think everyone carries more than they show. I just try to put the hidden parts into words." He nodded as if this made perfect sense, and we talked for hours, discovering shared interests and complementary worldviews. Miho became my best friend, then something more. The progression felt natural, inevitable, the way falling should feel. Easy and right and uncomplicated by power dynamics or hidden agendas. He knew about my family's wealth but did not care about it, was not impressed or intimidated by it. He cared about my art, my mind, the way I saw the world. And he shared his own struggles with me, his fears about his music career, his complicated relationship with his own family, his dreams and insecurities. We held nothing back, and that vulnerability created a bond one had never experienced before. When I told him I loved him, we were walking along the Han River on a spring evening, cherry blossoms falling like pink snow around us. He stopped, turned to me and smiled. "I was waiting for you to say it first," he admitted. "Because I've been in love with you for months, but I was scared you didn't feel the same way." The confession was so earnest, so devoid of games or manipulation, that I started crying. Miho panicked, thinking he had upset me, but I explained through tears that I was happy. Happier than I ever thought I could be. Happier than I deserved to be after the bitterness and rage that had driven me to destroy Guo Yue and her brother. "You deserve happiness," Miho said firmly. "Whatever you think you've done, whatever mistakes you believe you've made, you deserve to be loved and to love in return. Don't question it, Ming. Just accept it." So I did. I accepted his love and returned it fully, without reservation or fear. We moved in together after graduation, a tiny apartment in Hongdae that we filled with music and poetry and laughter. We collaborated on projects, his music bringing my words to life in ways I had never imagined possible. And we built a life together, simple and genuine and wholly ours. Years passed in a blur of creative productivity and domestic happiness. I published 3 books of poetry that earned critical acclaim. Miho's music reached the top of Korean charts. We got married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and both sets of parents. My father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and I knew he was thinking about how close we had come to losing each other, how narrowly I had saved our family from destruction. Miho's parents welcomed me warmly, never treating me differently because of my family's wealth. When I was 26, we had a daughter. We named her Suin, meaning pure and sound. Holding her for the first time, I thought about the timeline where I had died at 28, childless and alone. That woman had never known this joy, this overwhelming love for a tiny person who carried both mine and Miho's features, who would grow up surrounded by art and music and parents who adored her. I carried her ghost with me always, a reminder of what I had escaped, what I had been given a second chance to experience. One evening when Suyin was 2 years old, I received an unexpected message. It was from Guo Yue, sent from the prison where she was serving her sentence. "I understand now what I took from you," the message read. "Not just in this timeline but in one that doesn't exist anymore. You remember it, don't you? The life where I destroyed you completely, where you died alone hating me. Somehow you came back and stopped me before I could do it again. I don't understand how. But I understand why. And I'm sorry. Not for being caught. For what I intended to do. For what I did in that other timeline that only you remember." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to understand how Guo Yue could possibly know about my previous life. Had she somehow retained memories too? Or was she just perceptive enough to recognize that something about me was impossible, that I carried knowledge I should not have possessed? I typed a response and then deleted it, unsure what to say. Finally I wrote, "Your apology doesn't change anything. But I hope you become someone better, someone who creates instead of destroys. That's all anyone can do. Try to be better than they were." I never heard from her again. But the exchange stayed with me, a strange coda to a conflict I thought was finished. Guo Yue was serving her time, would likely emerge from prison in her 30s to face a world that knew her as a fraud. That was justice, perhaps. But it was also tragic. A life wasted on greed and manipulation that ultimately gained her nothing. I felt a strange pity for her, tempered by the memory of what she had done, what she would have done if I had not stopped her. Some people, given chances, would always choose destruction. Guo Yue was one of them. On my 30th birthday, I underwent a comprehensive medical examination. In my original timeline, this was the age where the cancer had been detected but was already too advanced to treat effectively. I was terrified, convinced that despite changing everything else, this one thing would remain constant. But the results came back clear. Healthy. No abnormalities. The doctor complimented me on maintaining such excellent health, unaware that every day past 28 felt like a gift I had stolen from fate. That evening, celebrating with Miho and Suyin and my parents, I raised a glass. "To second chances," I said. "To the courage to change your story, to protect what matters, to build something real from ashes and determination. To family, chosen and given. To love that heals rather than harms. To this life, impossible and precious and completely ours." My father, understanding more than I had said, raised his glass in return. "To my daughter," he said, "who saw danger before anyone else and had the strength to stand against it. Who protected us when we should have been protecting her. Who built something beautiful despite carrying burdens we cannot comprehend. We are proud of you, Ming. More than you will ever know." The years continued to unfold, each one a gift I never took for granted. Suyin grew into a thoughtful, creative child who loved music as much as her father and words as much as her mother. Miho's career reached international levels, but he never lost his gentleness, his core integrity. My parents aged gracefully, spending more time with their granddaughter than they had ever spent with me, making up for lost years. And I continued creating, pouring my experiences into art that resonated with others who had faced betrayal, abuse, impossible situations. My third book, titled Phoenix Rising, was a fictionalized account of someone who gets a second chance to prevent a tragedy. It was the closest I came to telling my truth, and readers connected with it deeply, finding in it echoes of their own struggles and survivals. The book won several awards and was translated into multiple languages. Journalists asked me where the story came from, and I would smile and say, "Everyone carries alternative timelines in their hearts. Versions of ourselves that could have been if different choices were made." I just wrote one down. One review particularly moved me. It read, "Guo Ming writes with the authority of someone who has died and been reborn, who understands loss at a cellular level and uses that understanding to create art that transcends mere entertainment. This is literature that heals, that acknowledges pain while insisting that transformation is possible." In a world that often feels determined to break us, Guo Ming reminds us that we can break first and still build something beautiful from the pieces. That was my truth, captured by a stranger who understood without knowing the specific details. I had broken completely, had died alone and bitter in one timeline. But I had been given an impossible gift, a chance to live differently, to protect myself and those I loved, to build something that honored both the woman I had been and the woman I had become. That was the real victory, not the destruction of Guo Yue and Chen Wei, but the life I had created afterward. The love I had found with Miho, the daughter we had brought into the world, the art that gave meaning to suffering. When Suyin was 5 years old, she asked me a question that made my breath catch. "Mama, why do you sometimes look at me like you're surprised I'm real?" It was the same question Minji had asked in the reference document, but this was my daughter, my moment, my truth. I pulled her into my lap, choosing my words carefully. "Because you are the most precious thing in my world," I said. "And sometimes I remember a time when I thought I would never have this. Never have you. So I look at you and feel grateful, so grateful it almost hurts." Suyin considered this seriously. "Like when I dream something bad happened but then I wake up and it didn't." "Exactly like that," I confirmed. "Except the bad dream feels very real, even though I'm awake now. Does that make sense?" Suyin nodded. "That's why you hug me so tight sometimes. Because you're reminding yourself I'm real." The insight was profound, this child who saw so much. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly why." She hugged me then, her small arms fierce around my neck. "I'm real, Mama. I promise I'm real." As Suyin grew older, I began teaching her the lessons I had learned the hard way. To value herself without arrogance. To be kind without being weak. To trust carefully and protect what mattered. To create from genuine inspiration rather than seeking approval. To build relationships on honesty rather than manipulation. To recognize when people were using her and have the courage to cut them off. These lessons came from my experiences in both timelines, wisdom bought with suffering and death and rebirth. But I also taught her things I had not known in either life until I met Miho. That love should feel safe, not scary. That partnership meant supporting each other rather than competing. That vulnerability was courage rather than weakness. That family was built through consistent action rather than biological connection or legal ties. That happiness was not something you found but something you created daily through choices and efforts and determination. One day when Suyin was 8, she came home from school upset. Another student had claimed credit for a group project Suyin had done most of the work for. "What should I do?" she asked me. The teacher believed her because she presented first. And now everyone thinks I didn't contribute. It was such a small thing compared to what Guo Yue had done to me, but I recognized the pattern. The theft of credit, the manipulation of authority, the erosion of truth. "First, we document what you actually did," I said. "Show the teacher your preliminary work, your drafts, your notes. Evidence matters more than claims. Second, we establish going forward that you keep records of your contributions, timestamps and drafts that prove your work. And third, we teach you to be strategic about partnerships. Not everyone deserves your collaboration, Suyin. Some people will always take more than they give. Learning to recognize them early saves you pain later." Suyin absorbed this seriously. "But how do I know who to trust?" It was the essential question, wasn't it? The one I still struggled with despite everything I had learned. "You watch their actions over time," I said. "One kind act doesn't mean someone is kind. One mistake doesn't mean someone is cruel. But patterns reveal character. Pay attention to patterns, and trust those slowly." It was the best answer I had, the result of 2 lifetimes of experience. By the time I was 35, I had lived longer in this second timeline than I had in my original life. The woman who had died at 28 felt increasingly distant. A shadow self I carried but no longer fully identified with. Had been her, yes. I remembered her suffering, her loneliness, her bitter end. But I was also so much more now. I was Miho's wife, Suin's mother, a successful artist, a woman who had faced down her destroyers and won. The victory had not erased the trauma, but it had transformed it into something I could carry without being crushed by the weight. One evening, Miho and I were cleaning up after dinner while Suin did her homework at the kitchen table. It was such an ordinary moment, domestic and unremarkable. But I felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. This was what I had died without in my first life. This simple, precious normalcy. A partner who did dishes beside me. A child who complained about math homework. A home that felt safe rather than hostile. I had fought so hard for this, had changed timelines and destroyed enemies and built something from nothing. And here it was, the impossible made real. What's wrong? Miho asked, noticing my tears. I shook my head, unable to explain the complexity of what I felt. Nothing's wrong, I managed. Everything is right. Improbably right. And I'm just grateful. He pulled me close, understanding without needing details. I'm grateful too, he said softly. Every day I'm grateful for you, for Suin, for this life we've built. I know you carry things you can't talk about, Ming. Weights I don't fully understand. But I see your strength, your resilience, and I'm in awe of you. His words broke something open in me. Some last defense I had been maintaining. I told him everything that night after Suin went to bed. About dying at 28 in another timeline. About waking up 10 years in the past. About preventing Guo Yue's infiltration and destroying her and her brother before they could destroy my family. About carrying 2 lives simultaneously in my memory. About the fear and rage and determination that had driven me. About the guilt I sometimes felt for being so ruthless, for ending their scheme so completely they went to prison. Miho listened without interrupting, his hand steady in mine. When I finished, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. I believe you, he said simply. I had expected skepticism or concern for my mental state. Instead, he just accepted it. Whether it happened literally as you describe or whether your mind created a narrative to process trauma, doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you survived something terrible and came out fighting. That you protected yourself and your family. That you built this life with intention and courage. That's who you are, Ming. A survivor who refused to stay a victim. You're not scared. Yes. Of what I did to them. Of the person I had to become to do it. Miho shook his head. I'm in awe of you. You faced people who were trying to destroy you, and you took them apart systematically. That's not cruelty, Ming. That's justice. They chose to hurt people. You chose to stop them. Those are not equivalent actions. His certainty helped more than he could know. I had carried so much guilt about Guo Yue and Chen Wei's prison sentences, wondering if I had been too harsh, if I should have found a way to stop them without destroying them completely. They would have done worse to you if given the chance, Miho continued. In the timeline you remember, they did do worse. They took your work, your family, your health, ultimately your life. You had every right to defend yourself. Every right to make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. Don't apologize for being strong, Ming. Don't apologize for surviving. His words released something in me, gave me permission to put down guilt I had been carrying unnecessarily. I had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. Years continued to pass in this graceful, grateful way. Suin grew into a teenager who showed early signs of her own creative talent, writing songs that made me cry and Miho beam with pride. My parents grew older but remained active in the family business, though increasingly they talked about retirement and spending more time with their granddaughter. Miho and I continued our creative collaboration, producing work that matured and deepened as we did. On the anniversary of what would have been my death day in the original timeline, I always took time alone to remember. Not with sadness but with acknowledgement. That woman, the one who died alone and forgotten, deserved to be remembered. She had suffered so others could learn from her mistakes. She had endured so I could build differently. She was my ghost, my shadow, my reminder to never take any of this for granted. And every year, I promised her that I was living well enough for both of us, that her suffering had not been meaningless. When I was 40, Chen Wei was released from prison. His sentence reduced for good behavior. I received a notification from the authorities, warning me in case I felt unsafe. But I felt nothing, no fear or anger or even curiosity. He was a middle-aged man now, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined beyond repair. He could not hurt me anymore. Guo Yue would be released in another 5 years, and I expected I would feel the same nothing. They had been threats once, but I had neutralized them so thoroughly they were now just people, ordinary and sad, living with the consequences of their choices. I never heard from Chen Wei directly, and I never sought him out. Some stories don't need final confrontations or dramatic conclusions. Sometimes justice is just watching someone face consequences and moving on with your life. That was enough. More than enough. Miho and I celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary with a trip back to Hangzhou, walking through the city where I had grown up in both timelines. The Guo family mansion still stood, though my parents had moved to a smaller home in the countryside. We visited my childhood room, which had been preserved exactly as I left it when I went to Seoul for university. Standing in that room, I could almost see the 18-year-old version of myself who had woken up here with impossible knowledge and desperate determination. I could feel the echo of her fear and rage and bitter hope. She had been so young, carrying such weight. And she had not broken under it. She had done what needed to be done and then moved forward into life rather than remaining trapped in vengeance. I was proud of her, that younger self. She had saved us all. "What are you thinking?" Miho asked, sliding an arm around my waist. I leaned into him, drawing comfort from his familiar presence. "I'm thinking about choices," I said. "About how different my life could have been if I had made different decisions, trusted the wrong people, failed to act when action was needed. I'm thinking about the fragility of happiness, how easily it can be destroyed if we're not vigilant, but also its resilience. How it can be rebuilt even after complete destruction if we're brave enough to try." Miho kissed my temple. "You've built something beautiful, Ming. Not just for yourself but for everyone around you. Suyin, your parents, me, everyone your foundation has helped. You took suffering and transmuted it into purpose. That's alchemy. That's magic." His words made me smile. I don't know about magic, but I know about stubbornness. I refuse to let them win, refuse to let suffering be the end of my story. That's not magic. That's just deciding that you deserve better and fighting for it every single day. On our last evening in Hangzhou, my father asked to speak with me privately. We walked through the city's famous West Lake area, watching the sun set over the water. "I need to tell you something," he said after we had walked in comfortable silence for a while. "Something I've never said but that you should know. When you prevented us from bringing Guo Yue into our family, when you insisted on investigating her background despite my resistance, you saved more than just our business or our reputation. You saved our family itself. Our relationship with you." He paused, clearly emotional. "In some alternate reality I cannot quite imagine, we must have lost you. Must have failed you so completely that you became a stranger to us. I don't know how I know this, but I feel its truth in my bones. And every day I'm grateful that in this reality, you fought for us even when we did not fight for you. That you saw danger and had the courage to stop it. You were braver at 18 than I have ever been. Thank you, Ming. Thank you for being strong enough to save us from ourselves." I started crying, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. He did know somehow. Maybe not the specifics but the essential truth. In another timeline, they had failed me catastrophically. In this one, I had prevented that failure by refusing to be passive, by taking control before circumstances could spiral beyond recovery. And he recognized what that meant, what I had done for them even though they had not asked and did not initially appreciate it. "I love you, Ba," I managed. I never stopped in either timeline. That's why I fought so hard. He pulled me into a hug, this man who had raised me twice in different ways, who had both failed me and been saved by me. "I love you too, daughter. More than I have words to express. Live well. Be happy. That's all any parent truly wants for their child." We stood there by the lake as night fell, father and daughter, united across timelines by love that had survived everything including temporary destruction and impossible resurrection. When I was 45, Suyin graduated from university with degrees in both music and literature, following in both her parents' footsteps. She had already published 2 collections of poetry and released an EP that had garnered critical attention. She was building her own life, her own career, her own identity separate from being Kong Miho and Guo Ming's daughter. Watching her at graduation, confident and creative and completely herself, I felt the story come full circle. This was what I had fought for, ultimately. Not revenge against Guo Yue and Chen Wei, though that had been necessary. Not even my own survival and happiness, though those mattered. But this, the ability to create life and watch it flourish, to give my daughter opportunities and freedom I had never had in my first timeline. To break cycles of abuse and exploitation, to build something clean and genuine that could be passed forward. At the graduation party, Suyin gave a speech thanking her parents for supporting her creative pursuits without trying to control them. "My mother taught me that your value comes from what you create and who you choose to become, not from what others take from you or project onto you," she said. "My father taught me that art should come from authentic emotion rather than commercial calculation." Together, they showed me that it's possible to be both successful and genuine, to make a living from your passion without compromising your integrity. That's a rare gift, and I'm grateful every day for parents who walked their talk. The words hit me hard. This acknowledgement that Miho and I had succeeded as parents, that we had given Suyin something neither of us had fully received from our own parents. We had broken cycles and built better. That was legacy. That was victory. Later, after most guests had left and Suyin was catching up with friends, Miho found me on the balcony looking out at Seoul's glittering skyline. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. His standard question after all these years. "I'm thinking about the woman I was," I said slowly. "The one who died at 28 in another timeline. I'm thinking about how she never got to experience any of this. Never got to fall in love, get married, have a child, watch that child grow into an amazing young woman. She died alone thinking love was something that happened to other people, that she was too broken to deserve good things. And I'm so grateful I'm not her anymore. That I got to become someone different, someone who built beautiful things instead of just surviving." Miho wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I leaned into his warmth. "She didn't die," he said quietly. "She transformed. You're still her, Ming. Just evolved. Everything she went through, every pain she carried, it's all still in you. But you took that suffering and used it as foundation for something better. That's not becoming someone different. That's becoming fully yourself. The version you were always meant to be if circumstances hadn't tried to destroy you first." His insight, as always, cut straight to truth. I was not separate from that dying woman. I was her reborn, her transformed, her refusal to stay destroyed. I carried her with me always, and that was right. She was my reminder, my motivation, my proof that people could change their own stories if they were brave enough and willing to fight hard enough. "I love you," I told Miho. "You've made this second life worth living." He kissed my neck gently. "You've done the same for me. We saved each other, Ming. That's what love is supposed to do." Years continued their inexorable march. Suyin married a fellow artist, someone who understood her creative drive and supported it unconditionally. They gave us grandchildren, two beautiful kids who filled our later years with noise and chaos and overwhelming love. My parents passed away within months of each other, leaving peacefully in their sleep after lives well lived. Miho and I grew old together, our hair graying, our bodies slowing, but our minds and hearts still engaged with the world. On my 60th birthday, I received one final message from Guo Yue. She had been released from prison 15 years earlier, and had apparently rebuilt some semblance of a life. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," the message read. "And you have every right to ignore this. But I wanted you to know that I've spent the last 25 years thinking about what I did, what I intended to do, what you stopped me from doing. Prison gave me a lot of time to reflect, and I realized something important. You didn't destroy me, Ming. I destroyed myself. You just prevented me from destroying you too. That's justice, not revenge. And I'm grateful you were strong enough to stop me because I don't think I could have stopped myself." The message continued. "I'll never be the success I thought I deserved. I'll never have the life I tried to steal from you. But I've found a different kind of peace working with young women in difficult circumstances, teaching them that taking shortcuts by hurting others never ends well. Maybe that's my penance. Using my experience as a cautionary tale. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your strength changed more than just your own life. Changed mine too. For the better, even though it didn't feel like it at the time." I showed the message to Miho and Suin, asking for their perspective. Do I respond? Yes. Or is some damage too profound for reconciliation? Suin, now in her 30s and wise beyond her years, considered carefully. "I think you respond, Mama. Not because she deserves forgiveness but because you deserve closure. You've carried this for so long. Maybe it's time to put it down completely." Miho nodded agreement. "You don't have to forgive her. But you can acknowledge her growth. People change, Ming. You of all people know that." So I wrote back, keeping it simple. "I acknowledge your efforts to become better. That takes courage, especially after failing so completely. I don't forgive you because I don't think forgiveness is mine to give for something that happened in a timeline that no longer exists. But I recognize that you've grown, that you're using your experience to help others avoid your mistakes. That's worthwhile. I wish you continued growth and peace." I never heard from her again after that, and I was glad. Some stories need endings that are neither reconciliation nor continued conflict, just acknowledgement and release. When I was 65, Miho passed away peacefully in his sleep after a brief illness. The grief was overwhelming, the kind that remakes your entire world. We had been together for over 40 years, had built a life so intertwined that his absence felt like missing a limb. Suin and her family supported me through those dark months, and eventually I found a way to continue. Not to move on because I would always love him, but to carry his memory forward while still living. I wrote one final book, a memoir titled Living Twice. In it, I finally told the full truth about my two timelines, about dying at 28 and waking up at 18, about choosing to fight instead of accept my fate. I expected skepticism, perhaps accusations of mental illness. Instead, the book resonated with readers around the world. People wrote to me saying they understood completely, that they too felt like they were living a second chance after trauma or loss or near-death experiences. The literal truth of time travel mattered less than the emotional truth of transformation. The book's final chapter was about Miho, about how he had given me permission to be fully myself, to carry my impossible history without shame. "He saw me completely," I wrote. "All my damage and all my strength, all my past and all my present. And he loved what he saw without trying to fix or change it. That's the rarest gift one person can give another. To be seen and loved anyway. To be believed when you share impossible truths. To be supported in building a life that honors both your trauma and your healing." He gave me that for 43 years, and I will carry it for however long I have left. On my 70th birthday, surrounded by Suine and her family and grandchildren who called me Nai Nai with affection, I thought about both my lives and how they had shaped each other. In my first life, I had been destroyed by people who should have protected me. In my second life, I had protected myself and built something beautiful. Both experiences were real. Both mattered. The suffering had given me wisdom. The second chance had given me opportunity. Together, they had created someone who understood darkness but chose light, who knew how cruel people could be but insisted on kindness anyway, who had died once and refused to waste the rebirth. "What are you thinking about, Nai Nai?" my youngest granddaughter asked, climbing into my lap despite being almost too big for it. "I'm thinking about choices," I told her. "About how the decisions we make ripple forward, creating futures we can't always predict. About how being brave when it matters most can change everything. About how love and art and family are the things that endure when everything else falls away." She looked at me with those impossibly serious eyes children sometimes have. "Did you make brave choices, Nai Nai?" "I did," I confirmed. "Very brave choices when I was younger. And they led me here, to you, to this life surrounded by people I love. So I'm grateful for the courage I found, even though it was hard at the time." She hugged me tight. "I'm grateful too. Because if you didn't make brave choices, I wouldn't exist." The simple truth of this statement took my breath away. She was right. Every choice I had made, every battle I had fought, every risk I had taken, it had all led to this moment. To her. To this family. To this life worth living twice. As the evening wound down and family members departed, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, thinking about my journey. I had been given an impossible gift, a second chance few people ever received. And I had used it well, changing outcomes, protecting loved ones, building something that lasted. The woman who had died at 28 in that other timeline would be proud, I thought. She had suffered so I could learn. She had endured so I could build differently. She deserved to be remembered not as a victim but as the foundation of everything I had become. "Thank you," I whispered into the darkness, speaking to that ghost of my former self. "Thank you for showing me what to fight against, what to protect, what truly matters. Thank you for your suffering, though I wish you hadn't had to endure it. Thank you for being strong enough to become me." And in the silence that followed, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past, both versions of it, was finally at rest. The present was good. The future stretched ahead for however long I had left, full of love and family and purpose. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything. The years after my 30th birthday brought a period of creative renaissance that I had never imagined possible. With the shadow of cancer permanently behind me and the legal victory against Guo Yue and Chen Wei secured, I felt free in ways I had not experienced in either timeline. The burden of survival, of fighting constant battles, of protecting myself from threats both real and remembered, gradually lifted. What remained was pure creative energy, channeled into work that felt meaningful and authentic. My fourth book, Voices of the Silenced, was a collection of essays about people who had been victimized by fraud, manipulation, and systematic exploitation. I interviewed dozens of individuals who had experienced what I had. The theft of their work, the betrayal of trust, the isolation that came from not being believed. Their stories were heartbreaking and infuriating, each one a unique variation on the same theme of predators identifying vulnerable victims and systematically destroying them. But what made the book powerful was that it did not end with victimhood. Each essay concluded with the person's journey toward recovery, toward justice, toward reclaiming their identity and their voice. The book resonated far beyond what I had anticipated. It spent 6 months on bestseller lists, was translated into 17 languages, and sparked conversations about corporate fraud, intellectual property protection, and the psychological tactics used by con artists. Universities adopted it for courses on business ethics and psychology. Law firms used it in training programs about recognizing and protecting clients from exploitation. And most importantly, readers wrote to me saying they saw themselves in these stories, that reading about others' experiences helped them understand and process their own traumas. One letter in particular moved me deeply. It was from a young man named Wei Jiang, who had been working at a tech startup when a new employee befriended him and slowly extracted information about the company's proprietary algorithms. The employee had disappeared with the data, and Wei Jiang had been blamed for the security breach, fired and blacklisted in the industry. "I thought I was stupid," he wrote. "I thought it was my fault for trusting someone who seemed friendly. But reading your book, I understood that I was targeted. That the person who befriended me was a professional con artist who would have fooled anyone. That recognition did not erase what happened, but it freed me from the shame I had been carrying. Thank you for showing me I was not alone." Letters like Wei Jiang's reminded me why I had written the book, why I continued to work through my foundation to help fraud victims. The damage these predators caused went far beyond financial loss. They destroyed people's ability to trust, to connect, to believe in their own judgment. Healing from that kind of wound required more than legal victory or financial compensation. It required understanding that you were not uniquely foolish or weak, that you were targeted precisely because you had qualities worth exploiting: generosity, creativity, trust, compassion. Reframing victimization as a consequence of having valuable traits rather than shameful flaws was often the first step toward recovery. Miho continued his own artistic evolution during these years. His fifth album, Echoes and Awakenings, explored themes of transformation, redemption, and the complex relationship between past and present. He had never fully understood my story about time travel and my previous life, oscillating between believing it literally and interpreting it as metaphor for trauma. But he understood its emotional truth, the way carrying two timelines affected everything I did and felt. Several songs on the album were explicitly about loving someone who existed simultaneously in multiple temporal realities, about being partner to someone who remembered futures that never happened. The album's critical and commercial success elevated Miho's status in the Korean music industry. He was invited to perform at major festivals, collaborate with international artists, and produce albums for rising stars. But fame did not change him in the ways it changed so many artists. He remained grounded, humble, genuinely interested in the music rather than the celebrity. He turned down lucrative opportunities that would have required extensive travel, choosing instead to be present for Suin's childhood. "Money can always be earned," he said when his manager protested. "But I cannot get back the years when my daughter is young. Those years matter more than any career achievement." His priorities shaped Suin's development in profound ways. She grew up watching both her parents balance artistic ambition with family commitment, professional success with personal integrity. She saw that it was possible to be successful without being ruthless, to be ambitious without sacrificing relationships, to work hard without defining your entire worth by your work. These lessons, taught through example rather than lecture, gave her a foundation that I had never had. I had grown up in the Guo family believing that love was conditional, that your value depended on your accomplishments, that family loyalty meant sacrificing yourself completely. Suin was learning different lessons. When Suin was 7, she came home from school upset because a classmate had copied her artwork and submitted it for a competition. The teacher, unable to determine who had created the original work, had disqualified both girls. Suin was devastated not just by the injustice but by the betrayal. "I showed her my sketch because I thought we were friends," she sobbed. "Why did she steal it? Why did she lie?" The question cut straight to my heart, echoing my own confusion when Guo Yue first stole my work. Miho and I sat with Suin, explaining as gently as we could that some people value outcomes more than integrity, that theft is easier than creation, that friendship means different things to different people. "But what do I do now?" Suin asked. "How do I stop her from doing it again?" I thought carefully about my answer, wanting to give her tools without making her paranoid or cynical. You document your work, I said. Take photos of your art at different stages. Date them, keep them in a portfolio. That way, if someone tries to steal your work again, you have proof. You also become selective about who you share unfinished work with. Real friends respect your creativity. People who steal are not friends, no matter how friendly they seem. Suyin absorbed this lesson with the seriousness she brought to everything important. Over the following years, she developed meticulous habits around documenting her creative process, maintaining portfolios, protecting her intellectual property. But she also learned to recognize trustworthy people, to distinguish between those who genuinely appreciated her work and those who were merely looking for something to exploit. These skills, learned young, would protect her in ways I had never been protected. As Suyin grew older, she began asking more pointed questions about my past, about why I was so careful about credit and ownership, about why I had such strong reactions to dishonesty. When she was 10, I decided she was old enough to hear at least part of the truth. Miho and I sat her down one evening and I told her in age-appropriate terms about Guo Yue and Chen Wei. About how I had once had an adoptive sister who stole my work. About how I had learned the hard way to protect myself. About how that experience shaped everything I did now, including teaching Suyin to be vigilant. Is that why you started the foundation? Suyin asked. To help other people who had things stolen like you did? He nodded. Yes, exactly. Because I remember how alone I felt. How no one believed me when I said my work was being stolen. I wanted to make sure other people did not have to feel that way. Suyin was quiet for a moment, processing. Did you ever forgive the person who stole from you? It was such a direct question, cutting straight to the complexity I had been wrestling with for years. I am not sure forgiveness is the right word, I said slowly. I do not think about her with anger anymore. I am glad she faced consequences for her actions. But forgiveness implies a restoration of relationship, a reconciliation, and that is not something I want or need. I have moved on. I have built a good life. What she did shaped me but does not define me anymore. Maybe that is its own kind of forgiveness. Releasing the hatred while still maintaining boundaries. Suyin nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. So you do not have to forgive people who hurt you as long as you do not let them keep hurting you. Exactly, I confirmed. You can acknowledge what happened, learn from it, and move forward without maintaining connection to people who harmed you. That is healthy, not cruel. These conversations with Suyin were healing in unexpected ways. Articulating the lessons I had learned, putting my experiences into frameworks a child could understand, helped me process aspects of my own story I had not fully examined. Parenting forced clarity, required stripping away defensiveness and self-pity to get to core truths. What did I actually believe about trust, boundaries, forgiveness, justice? How did I want those values transmitted to the next generation? What did I want Suyin to take from my experience without burdening her with my trauma? When I was 35, the Guo family reached out unexpectedly. My father, now 70, had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. My mother, overwhelmed by the diagnosis and terrified of the future, had convinced him to contact me. The email was formal and awkward, clearly written by my mother but sent from my father's account. It acknowledged, in careful diplomatic language, that mistakes had been made years ago, that they had believed the wrong person and failed to protect the right one, that they understood if I could not forgive them, but they hoped for reconciliation before memory made it impossible. I stared at the email for a long time, feeling a complex tangle of emotions. Anger, yes. Satisfaction that they finally acknowledged their failure. Grief for the father I remembered from my childhood, before Guo Yue poisoned our relationship. And underneath it all, an unexpected tenderness. They were aging, diminished, facing mortality and memory loss. Holding on to anger now felt like choosing bitterness over peace. I had already won the only victories that mattered. I had protected myself, built a successful life, ensured Guo Yue could never hurt anyone again. What more did I need? I showed the email to Miho and Suin, asking for their perspectives. Miho, as always, left the decision entirely to me. They are your family, not mine. Whatever you decide, I will support. But Suin, with the clarity children sometimes have, asked the essential question. Do you want them in your life, Mama? Not do they deserve it, but do you want it? I realized I did not know the answer. Part of me wanted to reject them as they had once rejected me, to let them experience the isolation and abandonment I had felt. But another part, perhaps the part that had been given a second chance, wanted connection. Wanted to believe that people could grow and change. Wanted to model for Suin that holding grudges forever was not the same as protecting yourself. I think I want to try, I told Suin. But carefully, with boundaries. I am not going back to being their daughter the way I was before. But maybe we can build something new. Something honest. Suin hugged me. I think that is brave, Mama. Braver than staying angry. Her words meant more than she knew. Bravery was not about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it was about extending tentative trust when you had every reason not to. I arranged to meet my parents at a neutral location in Beijing, a quiet tea house in an upscale neighborhood. When I arrived, I barely recognized them. My father, who had been robust and energetic in my memories, now seemed frail and uncertain. My mother had aged more visibly than I expected. Her hair completely gray, her posture stooped. They looked like what they were, elderly people who had lived with regret and were now facing their own mortality. We sat at a corner table, and for the first few minutes, no one spoke. Finally, my mother broke the silence. Ming, we do not expect you to forgive us. We do not deserve it. But we need you to know that we understand now. What we did to you. What we allowed to happen. Her voice shook, and I saw tears tracking down her weathered face. Guo Yue fooled us completely. She was so convincing, so sweet, so seemingly genuine. And you were difficult sometimes, challenging, unwilling to simply accept what we said. We mistook your independence for rebellion. Your honesty for rudeness. We wanted the easy daughter, the one who made us feel good about ourselves. And we threw away the real daughter, the extraordinary one. My father reached across the table, his hand trembling with early Parkinson's that accompanied the Alzheimer's. You saved us, he said. His words slightly slurred but unmistakable. When you prevented us from adopting Guo Yue, you saw what we could not see. You protected us from our own foolishness. And we repaid you by pushing you away. I will carry that shame for whatever time I have left. I looked at these diminished people, once so powerful in my life, now vulnerable and seeking absolution. And I realized that my anger had largely evaporated over the years. They had hurt me terribly, had failed me when I needed them most. But they had also raised me, loved me in their imperfect way, given me resources and opportunities that shaped who I became. I do not think I can give you full forgiveness, I said honestly. Too much time has passed. Too much damage was done. But I can give you this. I understand you were deceived. I understand you made mistakes from ignorance rather than malice. I understand you are human, flawed, capable of being manipulated. And I can build something new with you if you want that. Not the relationship we had before, but something based on who we all are now. My mother wept openly, and my father squeezed my hand with what little strength he had. That is more than we deserve, he said. Thank you, Ming. Thank you for being better than we were. Over the following years, I maintained careful contact with my parents. I visited them monthly, brought Suin to meet her grandparents, allowed them into my life in measured ways. It was not the close relationship I had once longed for, but it was honest. They got to know their granddaughter, got to see the successful, happy life I had built. And I got to make peace with my past, to close a chapter that had remained painfully open for too long. When my father passed away 3 years later, his Alzheimer's having progressed rapidly, I grieved genuinely. Not for what had been, but for what might have been if Guo Yue had never entered our lives. But I also felt gratitude that we had reconciled, however imperfectly. My mother lived another 5 years, becoming increasingly involved with the Phoenix Rising Foundation. She volunteered in the victim support programs, using her own experience of being deceived to help others process their trauma. I was a victim too, she told participants. I was manipulated into believing terrible things about my own daughter. I allowed someone to poison the most important relationship in my life. If I can warn others, help them recognize manipulation before it destroys their families, then perhaps some good can come from my mistakes. Her work was genuine and effective, and I came to respect her in ways I had not thought possible. When my mother died peacefully at 83, Suyin was 15. At the funeral, held in Hangzhou where my parents had lived their entire marriage, Suyin asked me, "Do you think they really changed Nai Nai and Yeye? Or did they just feel guilty?" It was a perceptive question, showing Suyin's developing understanding of moral complexity. "I think both," I said. Guilt motivated the initial reaching out. But the change was real. They did the work of understanding what they had done wrong. They made amends as best they could. They spent years trying to be better. That is all anyone can do. Acknowledge their mistakes and work to be better. By the time I was 45, Phoenix Rising had grown into one of China's most respected victim advocacy organizations. We had offices in 6 cities, employed over 50 people, and handled hundreds of cases annually. The organization had expanded beyond fraud victims to include people recovering from all forms of manipulation, abuse, and exploitation. We provided legal aid, psychological counseling, financial planning assistance, and community support. We lobbied for stronger intellectual property protections, better corporate governance standards, more serious penalties for fraud. We were making a real difference, changing systems as well as helping individuals. One case particularly stands out from this period. A young woman named Lu Shan contacted us after her business partner had stolen their startup's entire client list and launched a competing firm. Lu Shan had evidence of the theft but lacked resources to pursue legal action. More devastatingly, she blamed herself for trusting the wrong person, for not seeing the warning signs she now recognized had been present. She was depressed, questioning her judgment, considering giving up entrepreneurship entirely. Our team provided legal representation, connected her with a therapist specializing in recovery from betrayal, and helped her develop strategies for rebuilding her business with better protections. 2 years later, Lu Shan's reconstructed company was thriving, and the former partner was facing criminal charges. But more importantly, Lu Shan had recovered her confidence and sense of self. At a foundation gala, she gave a speech that brought me to tears. "Phoenix Rising did not just help me win my case," she said. "They helped me understand that being victimized was not a character flaw. That trust is a strength, not a weakness, when given to trustworthy people. That I could rebuild better and stronger than before. They taught me that surviving makes you a survivor, not a victim. And that distinction changes everything." Watching Lu Shan speak, poised and confident and whole, I thought about the journey I had taken from that dying woman in a Beijing hospital to this moment. I had been given an impossible gift, a second chance that defied natural law. And I had used it not just to save myself but to build something that helped others. The suffering of my first life had not been erased, but it had been transformed into purpose. The bitterness had been transmuted into compassion. The pain had become the foundation for healing, both mine and others. Miho, watching me from across the room, caught my eye and smiled. We had been together for over 25 years at that point, and he could still read my thoughts with uncanny accuracy. Later that evening, as we were leaving the gala, he asked, "What were you thinking about during Lu Shan's speech?" I leaned into him as we walked to our car, drawing comfort from his familiar presence. I was thinking about redemption, I said. About how the worst experiences of our lives can become the most meaningful if we are willing to do the work of transformation. About how much I love you for supporting this work, even though it takes time and energy away from our family. About how lucky I am to be alive, to be here, to have built all of this. Miho stopped walking and pulled me into a proper embrace, there on the sidewalk outside the hotel. I am the lucky one, he said firmly. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known, Ming. The strength it took to survive what you survived, to transform that suffering into something beautiful, to remain kind and hopeful despite having every reason to be bitter. That is rare. That is precious. I feel privileged to witness your life, to be part of your story. His words, sincere and unembarrassed, reminded me again why I loved him. Why this relationship worked when so many others failed. Because it was built on genuine admiration and respect, not need or dependency or convenience. The years continued their steady march. Suyin graduated from university with degrees in both music composition and international law, planning to work in intellectual property protection for creative industries. I want to do what you do, Mama, she explained. Protect artists from people who would steal their work. Make sure what happened to you does not happen to others. I was proud beyond words, though I made sure she understood the emotional toll of this work. You will hear terrible stories, I warned her. You will see the worst of human nature repeatedly. It can make you cynical if you are not careful. But Suyin was confident in her choice. You taught me how to do this work without losing myself. How to fight for justice without being consumed by anger. I will be fine, Mama. I promise. And she was. Suyin proved to be an exceptional advocate, combining her mother's strategic thinking with her father's emotional intelligence. She won cases, changed laws, protected hundreds of artists from exploitation. And she did it with grace and balance, never letting the work consume her the way it might have if she had carried my trauma rather than learning from it. Watching her thrive in this work was perhaps my greatest achievement, proof that the cycles of pain could be broken, that wisdom could be transmitted without trauma. When I was 50, I wrote my final book, The Return, a heavily fictionalized autobiography that told the truth about my time travel, my 2 lives, my transformation from victim to survivor. I expected skepticism, perhaps mockery. Instead, the book resonated with millions of readers who recognized the emotional truth beneath the impossible premise. Everyone carried alternative timelines, I realized. Everyone had versions of themselves that could have been, paths not taken, choices that defined futures. My literal time travel was unique, but the experience of living with multiple potential selves was universal. The book tour took me around the world, speaking at universities and conferences and bookstores about transformation, redemption, second chances. And everywhere I went, people told me their stories. Stories of survival, of transformation, of refusing to be defined by their worst experiences. I met cancer survivors who had remade their lives after facing death. I met fraud victims who had rebuilt from nothing. I met people who had lost everything and somehow found the strength to begin again. Each story reminded me that while my circumstances were unusual, my journey was not unique. Humans were resilient, adaptive, capable of extraordinary transformation when given even the smallest opportunity. One question came up repeatedly during the tour. Do you believe you really traveled through time, or do you think it was a metaphor your mind created? My answer evolved over the course of the tour. Initially, I insisted on the literal truth. I had died and been reborn, had lived 10 years twice, had changed the future. But gradually, I realized the literal truth mattered less than the meaning people derived from the story. Whether I literally traveled through time or whether my dying brain created an elaborate framework for processing trauma and imagining healing, the result was the same. I survived. I transformed. I built something better. That was real, regardless of the mechanism. Miho and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary with a return trip to Jeju Island, the place where we had honeymooned. The island had changed in 3 decades, more developed and commercialized, but it retained its essential beauty. We retraced the steps we had taken 30 years earlier, visiting the same trails and beaches and galleries. "We were so young," Miho observed, looking at photos from our honeymoon. "So hopeful and naive about what marriage would require." I studied the photos, seeing the couple we had been. Him 27 and me 23, both of us convinced that love was enough. "We were naive about some things," I agreed. "But not about the foundation. We built this marriage on honesty and respect and genuine liking. That foundation has held through everything else. Career pressures, financial stresses, the challenges of parenting, my complicated family history, your health scare 5 years ago. Love alone would not have sustained us through all that. But love plus mutual respect. That is unshakable." Miho took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine in the automatic way of long partnership. "I would marry you again," he said simply. "Knowing everything I know now about how hard marriage can be, I would still choose you. Every time. In every timeline." His words echoed my own thoughts. In my first timeline, I had died alone, convinced I was unlovable. In this timeline, I had found a love that sustained me through everything. The difference was not just luck or fate or the mysterious intervention that gave me a second chance. The difference was that I had learned to value myself, to demand respect, to walk away from people who diminished me. Those lessons, hard-won and painful, had prepared me to recognize and nurture genuine love when I found it. Miho had not saved me. It had saved myself. But he had given me a safe space to be fully myself, to bring all my damage and all my strength, and that was its own kind of gift. As I approached 60, I began thinking about legacy and succession. I wanted to step back from the day-to-day operations of Phoenix Rising, trusting the capable staff to continue the work. Suine was increasingly involved with the organization, though she maintained her own law practice as well. The foundation was stable, well-funded, institutionally mature enough to survive beyond my direct involvement. It was time for me to focus on other things. My art, my family, the simple pleasures of a life well lived. I told this to Suine over lunch one day, and she asked the question I had been asking myself. "What will you do, Mama? You have been fighting battles for 40 years in 2 timelines. What does life look like without a fight?" It was a profound question, cutting to the heart of my identity. I had defined myself by struggle for so long. First struggling to survive in my first timeline, then struggling to prevent that timeline from repeating, then struggling to help others survive their own ordeals. Who was I when the struggle ended? "I think I will paint," I said slowly, surprised by my own answer. I used to love painting before everything went wrong in my first life. I gave it up because I was too busy surviving. But I have always wanted to return to it. And I want to travel with your father before we are too old to enjoy it. And I want to spend time with any grandchildren you might give me. I grinned at her, knowing this would elicit the eye roll it deserved. Suine laughed. "Subtle, Mama. Very subtle. But yes, Jay and I are talking about starting a family soon. So you may get your wish." The prospect of grandchildren filled me with unexpected joy. I would get to do with them what I had done with Suine. Transmit wisdom without trauma, offer protection without paranoia, share my story in age-appropriate ways that would help them navigate their own challenges. I could be the grandmother I had needed but never had, someone who combined unconditional love with practical guidance, someone who saw their potential and helped them develop it, someone who celebrated their victories and comforted them through failures, someone who reminded them always that they were valuable inherently, not for what they achieved or produced.